Evelyn Sinclair stepped onto the luxurious airplane, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Around her, Christmas garlands wrapped around cabin fixtures, glinting under the dim, golden lights. She clutched her purse tightly, a small but crucial habit. The world saw her as polished and elegant, a woman who embodied the essence of high society. But tonight, as they flew toward their winter estate, she felt the weight of a hidden past. Settling into her seat, Evelyn cast a sidelong glance at her husband, Charles. He looked the part, immaculately dressed and absorbed in a newspaper. Yet the holiday glow softened his sternness, and she dared to think he might let his guard down tonight. She exhaled, relaxing slightly, but the feel of her purse against her lap was a constant reminder of what she kept hidden. Its contents were a relic of a life she'd tried to bury, a secret that must stay concealed. As the stewardess, Anna, made her way down the aisle, Evelyn took in the young woman's crisp uniform and keen gaze. When Anna reached her row, she met Evelyn's eyes, offering a polite nod. Evelyn responded with a soft, practiced smile, careful to keep her demeanor calm and collected. The gentle hum of the engines and soft murmur of passengers lulled Evelyn into a rare moment of ease. She reached for her compact to powder her nose, but in doing so, she felt her purse slip. Time slowed as the bag tumbled from her lap, landing open on the carpeted floor. In a heartbeat, Anna was there, picking up the purse with efficient grace. But as she did, Evelyn's heart raced. The young woman's fingers paused, her eyes catching on something tucked inside the bag, a small, inconspicuous package that could unravel Evelyn's carefully constructed world. Anna handed back the purse with a raised brow. "Interesting item, Mrs. Sinclair," she murmured, a hint of curiosity in her tone. Evelyn forced a light chuckle, her fingers closing around the purse protectively. "Thank you, dear," she replied, her voice level, though inside she was anything but calm. This small exchange, this almost unremarkable moment, felt like a tremor, hinting at a far greater quake beneath her polished surface. As the flight continued, Evelyn tried to suppress the tension bubbling beneath her calm exterior. She could feel Anna's eyes on her now and then, brief glances that felt like needles pricking at her composure. It was as if the stewardess's curiosity lingered in the air, crackling like static. Charles shifted beside her, folding up his newspaper and looking at her with faint concern. "Are you all right, Evelyn?" he asked, his brow furrowed. The lights of the cabin reflected off his reading glasses, casting shadows across his face. "Yes, fine," she replied too quickly. Realizing her mistake, she softened her tone. "Just a little tired from all the festivities, that's all." He didn't appear convinced, but he nodded, returning to his reading. Evelyn focused on keeping her breathing steady, willing herself to be composed. Her reputation, her very place in the world, rested on her ability to maintain this facade. A glance down the aisle showed Anna engaged in conversation with another passenger, but her occasional glances in Evelyn's direction were unsettling. Evelyn cursed herself for being careless, for allowing even a glimpse of her hidden life to slip through. She was a Sinclair, a name built on perfection and control, but one small mistake could unravel everything. She reached into her purse again, her fingers brushing against a small package that held so much weight, a reminder of the life she'd left behind. Memories of her younger years flashed in her mind, wild, reckless, and miles away from the polished woman she was now. To an onlooker, the cabin was peaceful, filled with quiet laughter and the clinking of glasses. But within her, Evelyn felt a storm brewing, and Anna was the lightning rod. She wasn't sure what the young woman suspected, but the glint in Anna's eyes told her she wasn't just being polite. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was just a flight, a short trip home, and all she had to do was keep her composure. Anna's interest would fade, and they would part ways as strangers. That was how it had to be. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she glanced around the cabin, she spotted Anna again, moving with the efficiency expected of a stewardess, but with a curious energy beneath the surface. Anna's glances were quick and subtle, yet they unnerved Evelyn. It was as if the young woman could see through her, detecting the hidden cracks in her poised exterior. The faint sounds of Christmas music drifted from the speakers, mingling with the soft chatter of passengers. To anyone else, this was a peaceful flight, a serene journey home for the holidays. But Evelyn's mind was filled with the echoes of her past, each note reminding her of the risks she'd taken to reach her current life. Suddenly, Anna approached her row again, and Evelyn stiffened. With a polite smile, Anna offered a refill for their drinks. Charles accepted graciously, but Evelyn simply nodded, keeping her gaze downcast. As Anna poured, she glanced at Evelyn, a question lingering in her eyes. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mrs. Sinclair?" she asked, her tone courteous yet laced with curiosity. Evelyn felt the unspoken inquiry, a subtle challenge hiding beneath the surface. She forced a serene smile. "No, thank you, dear. That will be all," she replied, her voice calm but her heart racing. Anna's gaze lingered a moment longer before she moved on. As soon as she was out of earshot, Charles leaned in, his brow furrowed with mild concern. "Evelyn, are you sure you're all right?" he asked, his tone low. "You seem unsettled." Evelyn drew a steadying breath, dismissing his question with a wave of her hand. "It's just the holiday rush catching up to me," she replied. "A little rest, and I'll be fine." Charles watched her for a moment, his eyes searching, but he didn't press further. Evelyn clenched her hands in her lap, painfully aware of the small, incriminating package inside her purse. It was just a trinket, a remnant of a life she thought she'd left behind. But tonight, under Anna's scrutinizing gaze, it felt like a ticking time bomb. Evelyn closed her eyes, hoping a moment of stillness would calm her nerves. But as she leaned back, memories surfaced, vivid and unbidden. She remembered a time when she was far from the elegant figure she now presented to the world, a younger, wilder version of herself. She could see it clearly. The dimly lit bars, the scent of smoke, and laughter that was a touch too loud. Back then, she had been free-spirited, indulging in the thrill of life without restraint. Her family's wealth had provided a safety net, one she used to its full extent. But her choices had eventually led to darker places, and the item in her purse was a reminder of those nights when she had stepped too close to the edge. It had taken years to shed that life, to marry Charles and build a reputation worthy of the Sinclair name. She had been grateful for the chance to reinvent herself, to create a facade so strong that even she began to believe in it. Yet tonight, the mere presence of that relic had stirred memories she thought were buried for good. As she opened her eyes, she caught Anna watching her from across the cabin, her gaze thoughtful. Evelyn's heart sank. What could Anna possibly know? She reassured herself that the stewardess was just a stranger, someone she would never see again once they disembarked. But a small voice in her mind whispered doubts. Anna approached again, but this time Evelyn noticed something. A flash of recognition in Anna's eyes, as if she knew exactly who Evelyn used to be. Evelyn's pulse quickened. How could this woman, a stranger, possibly hold a thread from her past? As Anna passed by, Evelyn forced herself to keep her gaze steady. She would remain composed. She would not let this young woman, or her own mistakes, disrupt the life she had fought so hard to build. Evelyn felt her carefully crafted mask beginning to slip. Every time she caught Anna's gaze or noticed the faint, curious smile on her face, it chipped away at her composure. She knew she had to regain control before her nerves betrayed her completely. Charles glanced at her as they were served a light dinner. He noted her lack of appetite and the tightness in her posture. "You've barely touched your meal," he said quietly, his tone laced with concern. "You're usually the picture of calm, but tonight you seem troubled." Evelyn forced herself to smile, a mask that had once come naturally, but now felt brittle. "It's nothing, Charles," she replied. "Just the holiday bustle. You know how exhausting it can be." He didn't seem entirely convinced, and she knew he was aware of her uncharacteristic tension. But what could she tell him? That a single object in her purse, a seemingly innocuous item, held the power to unravel everything they had built. Across the aisle, she caught sight of Anna, serving other passengers, moving with practiced grace. But whenever their eyes met, Evelyn felt exposed, as if Anna could see straight through the walls she had constructed. She tried to remind herself that Anna was just a stewardess, an employee whose brief curiosity would fade once they landed. But even as she thought this, Evelyn sensed that Anna was far from the ordinary airline staff member she appeared to be. The murmurs of other passengers blended with the hum of the engines, creating an oddly comforting backdrop. Yet Evelyn felt the tension within her mounting, as if the entire cabin were a pressure chamber threatening to crack her polished exterior. When Anna came by again, Evelyn's fingers tightened on her glass, her knuckles widening. "Is there something you need, Mrs. Sinclair?" Anna asked, her voice polite yet probing. Evelyn forced herself to release the glass. "No, dear," she replied with a forced smile. "I'm perfectly fine." As Anna turned away, Evelyn took a slow, measured breath, willing herself to hold it together. But she knew it was only a matter of time before something slipped, revealing the truth she had worked so hard to bury. Evelyn couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something unsettling about Anna's gaze, something more than idle curiosity. She tried to dismiss it, but a nagging feeling told her Anna's interest wasn't casual. There was recognition there, as if the young woman knew more about her than she let on. As the stewardess made her rounds, Evelyn's mind churned, sifting through fragments of her past. She tried to remember if they'd ever crossed paths, if there was any possible way Anna could have glimpsed a life Evelyn had buried. But nothing came to mind, that is, until Anna approached her seat again. This time, the stewardess leaned in, speaking just above a whisper. "I never thought I'd see Evelyn March again," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. The words hit Evelyn like a slap. She froze, her blood running cold. Evelyn March. That was a name she hadn't heard in years, a name she had left behind when she became a Sinclair. The life of Evelyn March was one she discarded, locked away as she stepped into the role of dutiful wife and society figure. But Anna's eyes held a knowing look, confirming that this woman did indeed recognize her, that she knew the person Evelyn used to be. Desperately, Evelyn searched her memory, trying to place Anna in the scenes of her past. The memories surfaced reluctantly, fragmented, but one image became clear. Anna's mother had been a fixture in the places Evelyn once frequented, a figure Evelyn had overlooked in her youthful self-absorption. Anna lingered for a moment, watching Evelyn's reaction with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. "It must be strange, carrying around the remnants of a life you've tried so hard to forget," she said softly, before turning to assist another passenger. Evelyn's mind spun. This was no coincidence. Anna had planned this encounter, hoping to confront her past and watch Evelyn squirm under the weight of her secret. A thrill of panic surged through her. If Anna's intention was to reveal her past to her husband or the other passengers, everything Evelyn had worked for could come crashing down. She looked over at Charles, who was blissfully unaware, flipping through a magazine. It struck her that she might be on the brink of losing him, that the life she had fought so hard to create could crumble with a single word from Anna. The stewardess had the power to expose her, to strip away her identity, and leave her vulnerable in a way Evelyn had never anticipated. As Anna moved down the aisle, Evelyn sat back, realizing the gravity of the situation. She had thought her past was behind her, buried and forgotten. But now, it had returned in the form of a young woman whose gaze felt like a dagger, piercing through every defense she had ever built. Evelyn's mind was a whirl of questions and memories. She sat rigidly, feeling exposed and out of control. She had spent years mastering her composure, learning how to smile through doubt, and how to mask every stray feeling behind a serene expression. But now, under Anna's watchful eyes, those carefully woven threads of her past began to unravel. As she stared out of the window at the darkened sky, Evelyn's thoughts drifted back to her days as Evelyn March. Those were times of risk, fueled by impulsive choices and rebellious energy. She remembered Anna's mother, a quiet woman who had often been in the same social circles where Evelyn indulged in her escapades. Back then, the consequences of her actions had felt distant, like a future she would never face. But now, they had returned to haunt her in the form of Anna, a figure she could neither ignore nor escape. Evelyn clenched her hands in her lap, feeling the tight press of her fingernails against her skin. She couldn't let Anna destroy the life she had so meticulously built. Not only would her social standing be ruined, but Charles, who had never known the truth of her past, would be devastated. He believed her to be the epitome of grace and composure, qualities he had admired from the start. Across the aisle, Anna was tending to another passenger, her manner professional, yet tinged with something colder when she glanced at Evelyn. That look was a reminder that Evelyn wasn't alone in her knowledge of the past, and that someone else had a claim to it, a claim that could destroy her. Evelyn glanced at Charles, who was engrossed in his magazine, blissfully unaware. Her pulse quickened as she realized the depth of her isolation. She was alone in her struggle, facing an opponent who seemed to know every hidden piece of her. And as Anna moved down the aisle, Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities. She would have to confront Anna somehow, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. If she could regain control, if she could find some way to leverage the situation, perhaps she could survive this flight unscathed. Evelyn knew that she couldn't remain passive. If she let Anna continue to hold power over her, the risk would only increase. Taking a steadying breath, Evelyn decided to confront the stewardess, not in an overt way, but subtly, carefully. She would have to keep her tone calm and controlled, as though she were simply making conversation. When Anna returned to offer more refreshments, Evelyn seized the opportunity. "Anna," she said softly, her voice smooth. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure of a proper introduction." Anna's polite mask didn't waver. "Of course, Mrs. Sinclair. It's an honor to serve you." Her words were courteous, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. Evelyn kept her voice steady, though every fiber of her being wanted to lash out. "You seem familiar," she said, keeping her tone casual. "Perhaps you've served on one of my flights before?" A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed Anna's face. "I doubt you'd remember me, Mrs. Sinclair. I'm just another face in the crowd, I suppose." Her voice was deceptively neutral, but Evelyn detected the undercurrent of accusation. For a moment, they held each other's gaze, a silent battle of wills. Evelyn felt a surge of anger, the kind she hadn't felt in years. She was used to controlling situations, to bending them to her will. But Anna's unyielding look reminded her that she was not in command here. "Well," Evelyn said, letting the word linger, "I would like to know you better. After all, it's rare to find such attentive service." Anna's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she understood the veiled threat in Evelyn's words. "I'm simply doing my job, Mrs. Sinclair," she replied coolly. "We all have our duties, don't we?" Evelyn's smile was tense. "Indeed. And sometimes those duties require discretion." The tension between them was palpable, like an electric charge hovering in the air. Evelyn knew she was pushing boundaries, and Anna's reaction told her that this exchange had not gone unnoticed. But she couldn't afford to back down. She was determined to remind Anna that she held some power too. As Anna moved away, Evelyn felt a flicker of satisfaction. She had made her point. She wasn't a helpless victim, and she wouldn't allow herself to be manipulated. But even as she leaned back, attempting to relax, she couldn't ignore the unease that lingered. Anna was far from finished, and the stewardess's cryptic response hinted at a deeper resolve. Evelyn's fingers tapped nervously against the armrest. She had tried to form an uneasy truce, but the exchange had only heightened her anxiety. Anna's defiance was clear. She wasn't afraid of Evelyn, and the memory of that spark in her eyes suggested she intended to make this confrontation personal. Evelyn's attempt at subtle intimidation had failed to rattle Anna. If anything, the stewardess's cryptic responses had only solidified Evelyn's fears that Anna intended to use her knowledge as leverage. But the stakes were too high for Evelyn to let this slide. She couldn't afford to let Anna dictate the terms, not when her reputation, her marriage, and her carefully constructed life were on the line. As the plane hummed along through the night, Evelyn watched Anna, her mind working frantically. Every passing moment felt like a countdown to disaster. The small package in her purse was like a ticking time bomb, a memento from a reckless youth, a secret that would shatter everything if exposed. Evelyn knew she couldn't keep playing this game of hints and insinuations. She would have to take bolder action. When Anna returned with the final round of service, Evelyn gestured for her to come closer. The stewardess leaned in, her face polite, but her eyes wary. Evelyn lowered her voice to a whisper, keeping her tone calm, yet filled with purpose. "Anna," she began, "we both know there's more to this than a forgotten acquaintance. I think we should discuss this privately, don't you?" Anna didn't respond immediately, but Evelyn noticed a flicker of hesitation. For the first time, the stewardess seemed uncertain, as if she hadn't anticipated Evelyn's direct approach. Finally, Anna nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Sinclair. I'll meet you at the back of the cabin in a few minutes." Evelyn's heart pounded as she waited, watching the other passengers engrossed in their own conversations, blissfully unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. She stole a glance at Charles, who was dozing peacefully beside her, his head tilted slightly against the seat. A pang of guilt twisted in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to let sentimentality cloud her judgment. After a few minutes, Evelyn made her way to the back of the cabin, where Anna was waiting. The two women stood facing each other in the narrow space near the service area, the hum of the engines masking their whispered conversation. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked, her tone firm. "If you're looking for something, money, a favor, name it. I'll see what I can do." Anna's expression hardened. "This isn't about money, Mrs. Sinclair," she replied, her voice low. "It's about accountability. You walked away from a world that left people like my mother struggling. You were part of it, whether you remember her or not." Evelyn swallowed, the weight of Anna's words sinking in. She hadn't expected this. A personal vendetta, a demand for justice from a past Evelyn had long since abandoned. But Anna's eyes were filled with a determination that Evelyn recognized, a resolve that she herself had once held when she'd fought to leave that world behind. "I've changed," Evelyn said, her voice softer, almost pleading. "I'm not that person anymore. You have to understand." Anna shook her head. "Maybe you have. But people like my mother never had the chance to escape. They were left behind, cleaning up after people like you, carrying the burdens you abandoned." The accusation cut deep, and Evelyn felt the walls she'd so carefully built begin to crumble. Anna wasn't here to blackmail her or seek personal gain. She was here to confront Evelyn with the consequences of her past actions, to hold her accountable in a way that society never had. They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken words lingering between them like a heavy fog. Finally, Anna spoke, her tone cold. "This isn't over, Mrs. Sinclair. And if you think you can just walk away from this, you're wrong." As Anna turned to leave, Evelyn felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had been so sure she could handle this, that she could outmaneuver Anna with a few carefully chosen words. But the truth was undeniable. Her past had caught up to her, and there was no escaping it this time. Back in her seat, Evelyn felt the full weight of her conversation with Anna settle over her like a shroud. For the first time in years, she felt truly vulnerable, stripped of the armor she had spent her life building. Anna's words echoed in her mind, each one a reminder of the life she had left behind and the people she had hurt in the process. Charles stirred beside her, blinking as he woke. He glanced at her, concern flickering in his eyes as he took in her pale face and tense posture. "Evelyn, what's going on?" he asked softly. "You've been on edge this entire flight." Evelyn hesitated, her instinct to brush off his concern clashing with the realization that she couldn't handle this alone. If she kept hiding the truth, the guilt and fear would consume her. She had to confide in him, no matter the risk. "Charles," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you don't know about me. Something from my past that I thought was gone, but it's come back." Charles's brows furrowed as he turned to face her fully, his attention now completely on her. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. She took a shaky breath, choosing her words carefully. Before I met you, I was a different person. I went by another name, Evelyn March. I was reckless, selfish, and I left behind a life that hurt people. I thought I'd escaped it, but there's someone on this flight who knows who I used to be. As she spoke, she saw the shock on his face, the way his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked, hurt seeping into his voice. I thought we were honest with each other. I didn't think it mattered, she replied, her voice trembling. I thought I'd left that life behind, that I could start fresh. But now, he ran a hand through his hair, processing her words. And this person, what do they want? She doesn't want money or anything tangible, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. She wants accountability. She wants me to face the consequences of what I did. They sat in silence for a moment, the enormity of her confession hanging between them. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice low and measured. Do you regret it? The person you were, the things you did? Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Every day, she whispered, but I thought I could bury it, that I could become someone better. And I thought that was enough. Charles's hand found hers, and he squeezed it gently. Maybe this is your chance, he said, surprising her. Your chance to truly make amends, to confront what you ran away from. Evelyn looked at him, her heart aching with gratitude and shame. She didn't deserve his kindness, his understanding. But in this moment, she knew she couldn't run anymore. She would have to face Anna, face her past, and find a way to make peace with the life she had tried so hard to leave behind. They sat together in silence, a fragile understanding forming between them. For the first time, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to break free from the secrets that had haunted her for so long. Evelyn felt a strange mixture of dread and resolve as she made her way to the back of the cabin where she had last spoken to Anna. Her conversation with Charles had given her a newfound sense of determination, yet the fear of what she might face remained. This time, she wasn't approaching Anna as a threat to be neutralized, but as a part of her past that she needed to confront. No more evasions, no more half-truths. She found Anna in the service area, her back turned as she arranged items on a tray. Evelyn took a steadying breath before speaking. Anna, we need to talk. No games, no hidden motives, just the truth. Anna turned slowly, her expression guarded. The truth, she echoed, her voice laced with bitterness. That's rich, coming from someone who's spent her whole life hiding from it. Evelyn nodded, acknowledging the sting of Anna's words. I deserve that. I've spent years running from who I was, and in doing so, I hurt people like your mother. People I didn't think about as I climbed my way to where I am now. Anna's gaze softened, though her posture remained defensive. So, what? You're here to apologize? To ask for my forgiveness? Evelyn hesitated. She knew an apology wouldn't erase the pain she had caused or bring any real closure to the people affected by her actions. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly. I know words mean little, and I don't have any right to ask for your understanding. But I want you to know that I regret it, all of it, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends. Anna crossed her arms, studying Evelyn with a mixture of skepticism and something softer, almost like empathy. My mother used to talk about you, she said after a pause. She said you were one of the ones who had it all but never looked back at the people left behind. The words cut deep, but Evelyn held her ground. Your mother was right. I was selfish. But I'm trying to change, Anna. And if there's anything I can do to help you or honor her memory, I will. Anna's expression faltered, and for a moment, Evelyn saw the young woman's vulnerability, a reflection of her own guilt and pain. After a tense silence, Anna nodded. There is something you can do, she said, her voice barely audible. Use your influence. Make sure people like my mother aren't forgotten. Make sure they have the support and recognition they deserve. A wave of relief and gratitude washed over Evelyn as she nodded, a silent promise forming in her heart. She couldn't change the past, but she could take responsibility for her part in it. "Thank you, Anna," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Anna gave a faint smile. A truce silently forged between them. Without another word, she returned to her duties, leaving Evelyn with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Returning to her seat, Evelyn's mind was a whirlwind of emotion. She had finally faced Anna, confessed her regrets, and made a promise she intended to keep. But as she sat beside Charles, the full weight of her actions bore down on her. She was exhausted, drained from the turmoil of the evening, yet a fragile sense of hope lingered. Charles looked at her, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "Did you speak with her?" he asked quietly. Evelyn nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, we came to an understanding." He took her hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. "You've carried this for so long, Evelyn. I can see how it's weighed on you. But now you can let it go." For a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to believe him. But as the plane began its descent, she felt a pang of uncertainty. Facing Anna had been a necessary step, yet it didn't erase the years of secrets and the walls she had built around herself. She had confessed part of her past, but there was still so much that remained hidden, even from Charles. As the landing gear engaged, Evelyn braced herself. She knew that making amends wasn't a simple process. It would take time, and the choices she made going forward would shape her future. She had made promises tonight, to Charles, to Anna, and to herself. But fulfilling those promises meant changing the very foundations of her life, dismantling the facade she had so carefully constructed. The plane touched down, and as they disembarked, Evelyn felt the burden of her transformation beginning. The people around her, the familiar faces of her society, would expect her to return to the life she had always portrayed. But something fundamental had shifted within her, a need to be more than just an image, to embrace the truth she had long denied. As she and Charles stepped off the plane, Evelyn caught sight of Anna one last time. They exchanged a brief nod, an unspoken understanding that lingered between them. Evelyn knew her journey was far from over, but she was finally ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With Charles by her side, she stepped into the terminal, feeling both fragile and resolute. For the first time, Evelyn felt truly free from the shadow of her past, prepared to rebuild her life with honesty and purpose. The days following Evelyn's return were filled with a new kind of energy, a quiet determination to set things right. She began by reaching out to contacts from her past, using her influence to highlight the struggles of those who, like Anna's mother, had been forgotten or overlooked. She attended events she had once ignored, spoke up in circles where silence had previously served her well, and even publicly supported causes she had once dismissed as unimportant. Evelyn knew that society would take notice, that whispers would circulate about her sudden interest in the plight of the working class. But she didn't care. Every step she took toward redemption, no matter how small, was a reminder of the promise she'd made to Anna and the truth she'd finally accepted about herself. With each action, she felt the burden of her past begin to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose she hadn't known she was missing. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed by Charles, who watched her transformation with a mixture of pride and admiration. One evening, after she returned from a fundraising event, he greeted her with a warm smile and a glass of wine. "You're doing wonderful things, Evelyn," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I can see the difference it's making, in both you and the people around you." Evelyn felt a warmth rise within her, a quiet contentment that was both unfamiliar and welcome. "It feels freeing," she admitted. "For so long, I thought I had to be perfect to keep everything buried. But now, I see how wrong I was. Being honest, facing my mistakes, it's given me a sense of peace I never thought possible." Charles reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn, and I know that, despite everything, you're finally becoming the person you were meant to be." In that moment, Evelyn realized that her journey wasn't just about atonement, but about rediscovering herself, shedding the layers of falsehood and embracing her true identity. She was no longer Evelyn March, nor simply Mrs. Sinclair. She was someone new, someone authentic. And for the first time, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. As word spread of Evelyn's newfound dedication to social causes, invitations to speak at events and participate in charity boards began flooding in. While many were genuine, others were laced with ulterior motives, attempts to capitalize on her new public image. Evelyn knew she'd need to tread carefully. The world she had left behind wasn't always kind to those who challenged its values. One evening, Evelyn received an invitation to a prestigious charity gala, one that would be attended by the very people who had once admired her flawless facade. It would be her first time facing them as her new, authentic self. She knew the night would be a test of her resolve, a challenge to see if she could truly stand firm in her transformation amidst the expectations of her old life. Dressed in an elegant but understated gown, Evelyn arrived at the gala with Charles by her side. The room was filled with familiar faces, all eyes drawn to her as she entered. There were whispers, subtle glances, and thinly veiled expressions of surprise and, in some cases, disapproval. Evelyn felt the weight of their judgment, but she lifted her chin, determined to remain true to her promise. Throughout the evening, she found herself drawn into conversations with people who questioned her motives, subtly challenging her sincerity. They asked if her newfound interest in charity was merely a passing phase or an attempt to cleanse her image. Evelyn answered each question with grace, refusing to let their skepticism shake her resolve. But the real test came when she found herself face to face with a former friend from her youth, someone who had known Evelyn March well and had been complicit in many of her reckless escapades. The woman, Beatrice, gave Evelyn a sly smile, her eyes gleaming with an unspoken threat. "Well, Evelyn," Beatrice said smoothly, her tone both mocking and nostalgic. "It's quite a surprise to see you here, mingling with the saints. Are you sure you belong?" Evelyn met her gaze steadily, feeling a surge of strength. "I'm exactly where I belong, Beatrice," she replied, her voice calm. "And it's taken me a long time to get here." Beatrice's smile faltered, and for a moment, Evelyn saw a flash of something, perhaps envy, perhaps regret. But whatever it was, Beatrice quickly masked it, offering a dismissive laugh before moving on. As the night wore on, Evelyn faced more veiled criticisms, more doubts about her sincerity. But each encounter only strengthened her resolve. She was no longer seeking approval from this world. She was here to prove to herself that she could walk among them without losing the person she had fought so hard to become. By the end of the evening, as she and Charles stepped into the cool night air, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of confidence. She had faced her past, and while the judgments of others still lingered, she knew they no longer had power over her. She had reclaimed her identity, not as Evelyn March or Mrs. Sinclair, but as someone who stood firmly in her own truth. As they walked toward their car, Charles turned to her, his expression filled with admiration. "You were incredible tonight," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You didn't let them shake you." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and determination. "I've finally learned that the only approval I need is my own," she replied, feeling the truth of her words resonate within her. She had passed the final test, and the person she had become was stronger than she had ever imagined. In the weeks that followed the gala, Evelyn found herself busier than ever. She dedicated her time to the causes she had promised to support, working alongside individuals who shared her desire for change. The work was humbling, a stark contrast to the life of indulgence and detachment she had once led. Yet every meeting, every event, every late-night planning session felt like another step toward her own redemption. One afternoon, while attending a community meeting for a new housing initiative, Evelyn saw Anna among the attendees. She hadn't expected to see her again, especially not here, in the midst of her new work. Anna's expression was unreadable as she approached, her gaze steady and assessing. "Mrs. Sinclair," Anna greeted her, a hint of respect in her tone that hadn't been there before. "I've heard about everything you've been doing." Evelyn smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Please, call me Evelyn. And yes, I'm doing my best. It's been a long road, but it feels right." They stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice soft. My mother would have appreciated this. She always believed that people could change, even if they didn't think so themselves. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected Anna's forgiveness, but hearing those words felt like a blessing. Thank you, she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. I'm doing this for people like her, for all the people I ignored in my past. Anna nodded, her expression softening. I see that now. With a small smile, she turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn with a renewed sense of purpose. As Evelyn continued her work, she found herself thinking of Anna's words often. They reminded her of the promise she had made, the one she had nearly lost sight of in her quest for acceptance. Her redemption, she realized, wasn't just about making amends. It was about honoring those she had once overlooked, giving voice to the people who had been silenced. Over time, Evelyn became a respected figure in her community, not for her wealth or status, but for her dedication and compassion. She was no longer the glamorous socialite she had once been. She was someone who had earned the respect of others through her actions, someone who had reclaimed her life on her own terms. Evelyn had finally found peace, not by erasing her past, but by transforming it into a force for good. Evelyn stood in the garden of her home, watching the sun set over the horizon. The air was cool, filled with the scents of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass, a reminder of the life she had now chosen to embrace. The house, once a symbol of status and wealth, had become a sanctuary for her, a place where she could live in harmony with herself and the world around her. Charles joined her, slipping his hand into hers as they watched the colors of the sunset blend into a warm, tranquil glow. You look happy, he observed, his tone gentle. Evelyn smiled, leaning into him. I am. For the first time, I feel like I'm truly living, like I'm connected to something real. She squeezed his hand, feeling a gratitude that words couldn't fully express. The work she had undertaken in recent months had transformed her, not just in the eyes of others, but in her own heart. She had forged meaningful relationships, learned the value of humility, and found a cause that gave her life a deeper purpose. She was no longer bound by the expectations of society or the weight of her past. She was free. As they stood together, Evelyn felt a sense of closure, as if the chapter of her past had finally come to an end. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, that her journey was far from over, but she faced the future with a newfound strength. Her life was no longer defined by the secrets she had kept or the image she had tried to project. Instead, it was defined by the honesty, resilience, and compassion she had worked so hard to cultivate. I never thought I'd see this day, Evelyn murmured, a trace of wonder in her voice. A day where I could stand here, with nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Charles kissed her forehead, his own eyes filled with pride and love. You've earned this, Evelyn. Every part of it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn felt a calm settle over her. She had come a long way from the reckless days of Evelyn March, and even further from the woman who had lived in fear of being discovered. She was whole, finally and truly, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. With Charles by her side, Evelyn looked forward to a future filled with purpose and possibility, a future she had fought to create, one she was finally free to enjoy. Hey, everyone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps us continue bringing you engaging stories filled with twists and turns. Let us know in the comments, what moment in this story had the biggest impact on you? Was it Evelyn's struggle with her past, her confrontation with Anna, or her ultimate journey of redemption? We'd love to hear which part resonated with you the most. And if you have ideas for future stories, drop them in the comments below. Whether it's another tale of redemption, a mystery, or something completely different, your suggestions help shape what we create next. Thanks for being part of our storytelling community. Can't wait to see what you all come up with.